Hi, welcome to my questions and answers video to celebrate my 1010 subscribers. Let's get started right away. Let's start with Jefferson Fernandez. Hi Jefferson. What is the role-playing game that took the most time for you to understand fully? When it comes to just understanding the role-playing game and not running it, it would be Vampire the Masquerade, because it's a very easy system to run, but when it comes to me making the jump from advanced Dungeons and Dragons during my early teenage years to a more storytelling focused experience, it was very difficult for me to understand that thing. This connects a bit with my birthday celebration video. I talk a bit about that there, but here I'm going to focus more on why it was so difficult for me to understand it. It took about a month and a half more or less of me studying the book, trying to get the system and the theme. Because I started playing role-playing games through Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, I had a more video gamey or board gamey approach towards it. It was very easy for me and for my players to understand what we were supposed to do in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We played perhaps a bit shallow or superficial experience when it comes to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We were focused on just going into those dangerous places, killing the monsters, taking their treasure, getting experience points, leveling up, rinse and repeat. It was all about personal power, with very little in terms of character development and exploring the game world beyond the dungeons and the adventure sites. We rarely had scenes with the player characters interacting with the townspeople and exploring the cities, building that sort of fictional life. So when it comes to Vampire the Masquerade, at first I was like, I don't understand this game because I don't know which ones are the dungeons or where you are supposed to go to fight werewolves and other vampires and take like treasure, in this case like weapons and money. So it was nothing like that at all. There were some people that used to play it a bit like that, like Dungeons and Dragons combined with Vampire the Masquerade, but Vampire the Masquerade was more about exploring the intricacies of that game world, of exploring the emotional and intellectual aspect of it all. It's more about developing your character as a real entity and making sense of the plotline with the setting, with the game world. So that was the goal. The goal itself was to create that awesome chronicle that felt a lot like a surreal or fictional version of real life. So it took quite a while for me to understand that, to see that there was something beyond just taking treasure and getting experience points. Definitely that's the most difficult role-playing game when it comes to me understanding it, because once I got the concept, running it was very easy. Now when it comes to the next question, Jefferson asks, what is the video that has made me the most proud of the content? Well, there are several videos that I'm proud of, but I think 3 of them stand out. One of them is completely related to role-playing games. The other one has more to do with video games, although it's more related to literature in a sense. And the other one is completely unrelated to gaming, or not completely, but mostly unrelated. First, about the on the role-playing side of things, that would be Cult Divinity Lost, my review of the core rulebook, because Cult is quite complex. You have elements of Kabbalah, of Gnosticism, Hebrew mythology, biblical elements, all sorts of philosophies and occult elements and spiritual details. So it was such a complex universe to convey or communicate. But I think things went quite well. I think the message was communicated adequately. It was quite rough around the edges because of some audio cuts between different chapters. But overall, I think it was a really good video. It communicated a lot. Cult itself has a lot of educational value, in my opinion. Although it is a fictional setting, you do have a way of making you, in that game, of making you aware of sometimes how the powers that be, they try to keep you unaware of different things in life related to science, to health, to spirituality. So you have that sort of tyranny going on, and the characters trying to make sense of things. So it's a role-playing game that really tries to awaken you. It feels a bit like the Matrix, that you have this reality that was forced upon you, and there is a real truth beyond that. So yes, I'm definitely proud of that video. Now when it comes to something that is gaming related, but is more on the side of video games and also literature, that would be the house in Fata Morgana. The house in Fata Morgana, yes. Sometimes I confuse the title. So the house in Fata Morgana is one of the most touching experiences that I have seen. It's, you really have to watch that review. I'm going to put the link in the description. But just talking about that game in that video, it felt like an emotional, it's not an emotional roller coaster, it was more like an emotional atomic bomb. I felt so so charged with emotions when I did that video, and it reminds me of why that game is so amazing, or that visual novel, because there are some small gaming elements to it, but it's more like a visual novel. So I'm really proud that I could communicate many things through that review while keeping it spoiler free. And I still want to, I hope I get a chance this October or November to continue with my my take on the other characters in that visual novel. I'm going to put the link in the description below as well to those videos. So yeah, that definitely made me proud. And the other video that makes me quite proud, and that it's unrelated to those things, well, it's my Sungazing video, because I think a lot of people are suffering from all sorts of chronic physical and mental problems. So just trying to help some people get into the correct mindset or information of things that have been kept taboo intentionally, because there are some people who gain money from people getting sick and even dying. So when it comes to my Sungazing video, I'm going to put the link in the description as well. I've been doing, and it's there are many misconceptions about what that that method represents, or how you carry out that method. But I've been doing it for 1 year and 4 or 5 months, and the benefits, in my opinion, are amazing. I'm currently 38 years old, and when I in different physical and mental ways, when I, let's say, outclass or overcome much younger people or people around my age, it makes me feel like I'm following the correct path. So I hope that if you are searching for something that could be beneficial for your physical and mental health, definitely watch that video. And it's not like, don't get deceived by the title. It's not like you're going to walk outside and look at the sun for who knows how much time when it's at its peak. There are a couple of hours where the UV index is quite low, and it's actually possible to gradually, carefully benefit yourself from the rays of the sun. So I would definitely recommend that you watch that video. It's something that I've been doing. If you don't want to do that, don't do it, but it's worth looking into, in my opinion. Next is, what video do I want to remake? Well, I have several videos that I want to remake, especially the first videos that I uploaded to this channel, because at first I didn't know too much about reviewing a role-playing game. Perhaps my first video of the entire channel, Epoch, my review of Epoch. That's a horror role-playing game. It's driven through a card system. It's one of the best horror role-playing games that I have seen when it comes to one-shot experiences. That game is not for campaigns, it's for one-shot experiences. I would like to attempt to review it this very month of October, because it's a horror game. It would make sense with the theme of Halloween and all of that. Yes, I would like to remake that video. And then he asks, what is the most influential RPG writer in my life? This is a really tough question, because I actually haven't thought about that, but I think just from the top of my mind it would be, let me get the names correctly. There's 4 authors. Those would be the team for the Hackmaster role-playing game, which is my favorite fantasy role-playing game: David S. Kenser, Steve Johansson, Jolly Blackburn, and Brian Jelk. The 4 of them created the masterpiece that is Hackmaster. So of course, they every time that I see a role-playing game that is a simulationist role-playing game, or that is far from a simulation and is focused more on storytelling and character development, I always compare it to Hackmaster. How close to Hackmaster is it? And I use Hackmaster as a way to measure simulation role-playing games. And when it comes to storytelling, I always think, well, it's good that they didn't add that mechanic from Hackmaster, because it would make the experience too complex, or something similar to Hackmaster. So Hackmaster is kind of like, yes, it's the thing that I use to measure many role-playing games. So those writers are the ones who became a powerful influence, in my opinion. And I'm also saddened because one of them died last year. It was I lost the Steve Johansson. Yes, I wanted to get the last name correctly, because I actually talked to him by email, and he was such a nice guy. Pretty amazing. Well, moving on. Jefferson Fernandez says, congrats for the subscribers, thanks for the great videos. Thank you, Jefferson. Next we have Big Rules 666. He asks, what is one piece of your favorite art that illustrates role-playing and adventure for you? There is this illustration, I'm going to put it on the screen right now, from the All Flesh Must Be Eaten role-playing game of the core rulebook. You see this group of players playing, which is kind of like a parody version of Dungeons and Dragons, and suddenly this swarm of zombies, they go into the store and start attacking them. And this art piece, in my opinion, represents that way in which fiction simply invades the tabletop role-playing experience. When you actually feel like you are there, that's the greatest thing about role-playing games, in my opinion. So here, these zombies, for me, they represent that fictional element, or that suspension of disbelief, or that power of imagination, just jumping into the session, and suddenly all of the players and even the game master, they feel like they are inside this fictional setting. So in that regard, I think that illustration is perfect. But when it comes to art in a more general sense that illustrates role-playing and adventure for me, there are several candidates when it comes to my favorite art form, but I really have to go to anime, and that would be the Record of Lodoss War. That's Dungeons and Dragons at its peak in anime format. I made a video about that several years back. I'm going to put the link in the description. I hope you will watch that video. If you do not know what Record of Lodoss War is, that's Dungeons and Dragons in anime. There are other anime and original video animations that also do a great job. Maybe I will bring out some videos about them later on. But yeah, definitely it will be Record of Lodoss War as a more general art form. Now, Vic also asks, what is the best video game RPG experience you've had? This is also a very tough question. Wow. I think there are many, but there are a couple of experiences that immediately come to my mind. One is Dragon's Dogma. It's more of an action RPG, of course, but Dragon's Dogma, I really have to talk about spoilers. I'm going to put in the description the mark of when I talk about spoilers and when I stop talking about spoilers concerning Dragon's Dogma, because I really have to talk about the plotline. For those of you that haven't played Dragon's Dogma, they don't give you all of the details, but they give you enough to piece together things and you make sense of what is actually going on. But there are many games that just give you hints and tidbits of information so that you complete the rest. Like, for example, in the case of Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, they give you just hints and then you start to make sense of it all. Sometimes the players create a better story than what was intended by the designers of the game or the writers. When it comes to Dragon's Dogma, I think that represents something that expresses a quest that many people undertake and a lot of them fail, and perhaps a few of them triumph in that quest. In the game, you play as the Arisen. The Arisen is basically someone who got his entire life ruined by a dragon. The dragon comes and destroys the village, destroys his friends and family, and he is the only one with enough courage to try to fight the dragon with a meager weapon. So the dragon defeats the character, obviously, because it's a human against a dragon. There are many rare exceptions when the human is actually triumphant. But the dragon feels a lot like an analogy for what would be considered as the devil or the adversary against mankind. So the dragon rips out the heart of the character and basically provokes him so that he now undertakes this mission to kill the dragon that destroyed his entire life. And so it's a quest of fighting against adversity in real life. In my opinion, it's a sort of analogy or perhaps a metaphor. And when it comes to a choice, because many different Arisen have attempted to defeat the dragon, and some of them are seduced by the dragon asks them to sacrifice a loved one in exchange for riches, fame, and power. I think that also happens in real life in several ways. And some others fight against the dragon, perhaps even defeat the dragon, and they become dragons themselves because they didn't do it for the right reason, to try to bring some sort of harmony for the world or balance. But if you do things right, you defeat the dragon and you become a sort of god. So it's a really deep, important theme, in my opinion. Interpret it as you will, however you like. In real life, there's a lesson there to be gained. And there's actually a series in Netflix of Dragon's Dogma. It's kind of like a prequel to the game. I was worried because Netflix, you know how it pushes its politically correct agendas constantly. So it ruins the plotline of several things, but in this case they actually respect the lore of Dragon's Dogma. So I would recommend that you watch that anime. It's not so powerful in terms of theme and philosophy when compared to the video game. But the action scenes, the combats are really good, and there is a bit of a lesson at the end as well. And you also understand some things in the game of how things happened. My other video game RPG experience is definitely Persona 3. I have the collector's edition here. Let's see if I excuse me. if I can show it correctly. So Persona is also, it's kind of like many of you know it, the Shin Megami Tensei video games. It's basically an anime style, but when it comes to the games of Persona, it's always about these teenagers trying to make sense of some really dangerous and serious occult things. I also have the game right here. I actually lost my interest in Atlus. Why is it appearing like... Oh yeah, sorry. I didn't notice that my camera is kind of like mirroring things. It's PlayStation. Oh my god, it's PlayStation. This should be the other way around. Sorry about that. This is the second time that I've used this recording program. I didn't notice that it was going to look like this. But anyway, it is about this group of teenagers that are dealing with some dangerous occult things, and every midnight this huge tower appears when it's supposed to be their school, this structure that basically seems like a connection between dimensions. And the thing that struck me the most about Persona is that you have these teenagers dealing with their everyday lives, but also they have to save the world basically by taking on the different beings within this tower that are mostly angels and demons. So you have some really cool concepts of again trying to find out what is going on. The art book's actually quite cool. You have all the different concepts of the characters. I also think that it's great as a simulation of experiencing life in a video game, because the main character, the one with the blue hair, he basically forms bonds of friendship and romantic bonds as well with the people that he meets. And the way that you, for example, go to school, which actually in my opinion a horrible thing to do, homeschooling is much better in my opinion. You don't get too much Marxist propaganda that way, and you are not disinformed or shown false information about science and history. So you have to deal with that going to school, and then after school you can do different activities. You could go to karaoke or hanging out with friends, and it felt so real. And because I actually played Persona while I was about to exit college, and I was so disappointed with college, with the people that went there, myself included, and with the teachers that were basically trying to turn everyone into socialism. It felt so disappointing that they pushed all of that, they forced so many things into your mind, and if you did some project against that propaganda, you were punished by that for that. So I felt a bit lost at that moment, like what am I supposed to do, what is going on, what is this reality, this insane world? But then everything started to make sense, so I felt like I was experiencing a bit of what the characters in this game were experiencing when they were finding out the truth of things. I also like how they handled the villains. Look at this main villain over here, the one called Takaya. He looks a lot like a certain someone. I'm sure you can imagine who. So this is a very powerful role-playing game. The gameplay gets a bit monotonous, but when it comes to the journey of finding out the truth, really an awesome role-playing game. Now let's take a look at the other questions. Thanks, Vic, for your questions. Next we have Tammy of the T-Rex. Tammy asks, will you play in a game with my group, Lamentations of the Flame Princess? I will have to pass on that, Tammy, because of two reasons. Well, first, I like playing at a physical table. Several years back I used to play online, mostly play by post or play by email or play by forum. I also played by video with Google Hangouts. I also tried Roll20 for a bit, didn't like it too much, so I don't like playing like that. And the other reason is that I have my hands full with the reviews for my channel. Many of them are a bit behind on the queue, especially because of the thing that I mentioned with my hard drive problems. I also have things related to duties, work in real life, my other role-playing group, my solo campaign From the Ashes. I also want to keep playing the Deluxe Tunnels and Trolls adventures, and when it comes to playing video games and hanging out with friends. So I feel like I'm too cluttered with things right now, so I'll have to pass that, but thank you for asking. Next we have Dreadlock, and Dreadlock says, hi, I must be one of the new subs in the 1000 and 1010. Cool. I've been watching your bits since you did the Earth Reborn review 4 years ago. I'm going to put a link in the description below to that. It's one of my favorite board games. I am so saddened that I didn't get to play it more. I want to play it more eventually if I find someone to play it with. But when it comes to Abraham's Method, some of you may remember, I think that I mentioned in my video of Abraham's Method that I wanted to use Abraham's Method with board games to see if it also works. If you're watching this video and you do not know what Abraham's Method is, I'm going to put a link in the description below. So when it comes to Earth Reborn, there's information that is simply going to, you cannot keep it hidden. When you play with another person, you need to keep that information hidden. So it's going to be quite the challenge to see if I can work something with Abraham's Method. Well, going back to Dreadlock's comment and questions, he says, I bought it because of that, but I just subbed because of your new solo RPG bits. Thanks, Dreadlock. And he says, thank you. I happened to own all of those PDF sets from him. He's talking about the Game Master's Apprentice decks from Abraham's Method, but never quite knew how to use them. I was hoping you could do a playthrough of a solo sci-fi RPG called Mothership on Drive-Thru RPG, or use Abraham's system on any sci-fi RPG you like. Thanks. When it comes to the Game Master's Apprentice decks, I think there is another separate document, Dreadlock, that also tells you how to use those decks. Maybe you will like to look into that. Maybe the instructions with the decks were not sufficient with the experience that you wanted. But when it comes to Mothership, I also own Mothership. If I'm not mistaken, it's currently available as pay what you want on Drive-Thru RPG. Mothership isn't exclusively a solo role-playing game. However, Dreadlock, I don't know if you are aware, but there is a company called Parts Per Million that has a lot of solo supplements for different role-playing games. They are basically mini Game Master emulators. They have one for OSR or old school Renaissance sort of fantasy games. They also have one for Symbaroum, for Mutant Year Zero, for Stars Without Number. They have many emulators, and there's one for Mothership. So maybe you want to look into that. Now, when it comes to me running something, well, Mothership, when it comes to Abraham's Method, I developed that method specifically to run an adventure module or campaign with a system. And because I only own the Mothership core rulebook, I don't have an adventure for Mothership. When I get an adventure for Mothership, maybe I will do it. But in the meantime, I would definitely like to use Abraham's Method on another sci-fi game, perhaps a very different game from my From the Ashes White Box campaign. So I hope I can bring it out this October, so you can see how I use Abraham's Method with that sci-fi RPG. But if you still wanted me to run like a solo Mothership experience, maybe if I can in November or December, maybe I could run it using that solo emulator that I was telling you from Parts Per Million. And so thanks for your question, Dreadlock. I will see what I can do about that. Next question we have Huygens. Hi Huygens. He asks, How do you keep immersion going when you solo RPG, when you play solo role-playing games? Hmm. I think I think it depends on three things. One is consistency. Two is the system itself, and three, what I would call reinforcement of the fictional reality. So let's start with consistency. When consistency is lost, or something feels too forced from any emulator that you are using, if you are using Mythic, or if you're using Abraham's method with the Game Master's Apprentice deck, or maybe you're using any other Game Master emulator that you have in your possession, when you start to feel that the results are too forced, that they don't make sense with the theme, with the story, with the characters, then things start to go the wrong way. You feel like you're being pulled out because things do not feel consistent. There is no coherency to what is going on. So it's very important that you, in my opinion, that you use only one or two solo tools, at most three, that are constantly within the theme, within the story, within the fiction. Even if they take you through some very unexpected results, like for example, maybe you are running a horror role-playing game and suddenly you get some comedic results, you can save the situation, because in some horror films you do have some tension relief moments. So you have to accept that random element, but try to steer it immediately back to horror. Or maybe you are running a fantasy role-playing game more focused on gore, violence, and action, and suddenly you get some results that are quite romantic. You can have those elements, but immediately steer that romance back into the action, into the goriness, into the dark fantasy if you're running it like that. So it's all about steering those random elements that you get that do not make sense with the storyline, with the theme, back into the main theme, into the main storyline. That's what I mean about being consistent. And I also remember one time when I played with the most horrible role-playing game group that I have had in my entire life. I was running a game of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it was such a horrible experience, mostly because of the people. They were basically thugs. They were thugs. But one of them wanted their character to be named as his character to be named as Hooligan. That was his character's name, Hooligan. And I always thought that was such a ridiculous way to name your character. But a few years later, I actually thought that could have been a good concept, because imagine if your character is called Hooligan, from the realm of Manchester, from the Union of Manchester, Manchester United, and he actually loves getting into trouble, and maybe he's chaotic neutral and starts bar fights and such. That would be a funny character concept. Even in a dark fantasy setting, you could take that comedic element and steer it into horror. So yes, it's all about consistency in that regard. Now, when it comes to the system, Huygens, I think that it's very important that both the emulator that you are using to play a solo RPG, or the emulators or tables or anything, and the system itself, you need to feel quite comfortable with it, to the point that you are not constantly looking for different rules, and you are confused about how to apply some mechanics. You need to feel comfortable enough with the system to run it smoothly, because when you start to stutter, just like when you're playing with players, it affects the experience a bit. There are some very rare occasions when it's possible to pause the game for a few seconds, perhaps at most a minute at most. But for the most part, it's better if you have a system that you are completely comfortable with, because as you are making those rolls, and as you are making sense of the interactions, the attacks, the exploration, the spells, anything that you are using, the skills, as long as it's running smoothly, you feel like you are right there. But when you start to stutter with the system, or you start to, yes, you're unsure how to apply this or that, and you start to focus more on looking through the rules rather than playing the game, then I think that could pull you out of the gaming experience. It could affect the immersion. And when it comes to the third aspect that I told you, a reinforcement of a fictional reality, I think it's worth it to have something that further pulls you in to the role-playing game, a mechanical aid of sorts, or an external aid. It could be music. For me, it's music. I always, when I play solo role-playing games, I play some music on the background. For example, when I play From the Ashes, I put music from Demon Souls or Dark Souls or Bloodbound to get into that mood. You could also, for example, even if the game doesn't need miniatures, you could use miniatures if it pulls you in. Or maybe there are some people that actually like to dress for the part when they are doing it. I once knew a player from Spain that it was somewhat funny in my opinion for me, because I don't do that, but maybe for some of you will work. He always wears some sort of hat or headpiece that reminds him of what he is playing. So for example, every time he plays sci-fi game, he puts on some sort of headpiece or earpiece that makes him feel like he's in a sci-fi setting. So it doesn't have to be something too complicated. If you have like a Bluetooth earpiece, you could put it on and pretend like it's your sci-fi device or something, or you're playing a cyberpunk game, it's your implant, your cybernetic implant or something like that. And that player we actually met because in there was this Spanish forum that is no longer available, and he was asking if you knew about some cheap way of getting a fantasy helmet, like for a knight. And I told him that Fat Dragon Games from Breakthrough RPG, they have this cardboard looking helmet, the one that you print on thick card and you basically build it together. And I told him that was a cheap way of getting a helmet, so he was quite happy about that. I don't know if it worked out for him, but that's the main thing, is that he had that thing that pulled him into the experience. So maybe you need to find that thing that gets you going into the mood. It makes you feel immersed. And I think this connects a bit with that book and the movie Somewhere in Time. Maybe you have read the book or seen the movie from Richard Matheson. And in Somewhere in Time, it has to do with a philosophical concept of time travel. Some philosophies think that it is impossible to travel in time physically, and you can only do it mentally. So the character, this has something to do with the film. In the film and the book, there is more to that. Of course, the character actually makes a sort of physical journey. But when it comes to traveling, according to that philosophy, to different philosophies, to a particular time in the past, you basically need some things that reinforce that journey. So in the case of the character in the book and the film, he starts to dress like someone from the age that he wants to, from the year that he wants to travel to. In other ways, people also like listen to music from that era or from that decade. They also start to watch programs from that year. So basically anything that reminds you of that particular time and space is going to take your mind to that place according to that philosophy. And you also needed a way to go back in to your present time, so you had to, it looks kind of like auto hypnosis in that sense. So they did it like in the case of Somewhere in Time, I think if I remember correctly, the character, you had this coin, and whenever he would look at that coin, he will be pulled back into present time. So I think this relates to that sense of immersion, that if you want to feel immersed into any role-playing game, if there's some music or some way that you can dress according to that fiction, you can or using miniatures or maps or whatever you are using, I think that would assist you, potentially assist you into getting more into that role-playing game experience, into that fictional reality. And there are probably some people that take it to the extreme. There are, I think there are good LARPers, healthy LARPers, but I also think that some LARPers get too much into their character as a sort of escapism, that they are living their lives as if they are in a fantasy setting. So that's quite tragic. But when it comes to someone who is healthy, rationally speaking, who is not a bit crazy, that will work for you. So thanks for your question, Huygens. Next we have Marco from Multiverso Distopico. Hi Marco. Congratulations on that milestone. You certainly earned it with the quality of the content you create. Thanks Marco. And now here are some questions from Marco. He asks, is there a game you really want to try out but never got to play? What game and why not? That would definitely be the Dying Earth role-playing game. Because of a bundle from Bundle of Holding, I have all of the books for the Dying Earth. Many of you know that I love the Dying Earth. That is the work of literature, the entire anthology of the Dying Earth. I love it so much. I did a video about it several years back. I'm going to put a link in the description. And basically, I couldn't play it because for it to feel like the authentic experience, you need people that are they have a good understanding of English, because the Dying Earth has a lot to do with these ridiculous English words. You have some made-up words by Jack Vance describing you see all of those names in Dungeons and Dragons for those spells that sometimes feel a bit too ridiculous, with some words that are unnecessary. They took inspiration from the Dying Earth, so that works into the mechanic of the role-playing game. And because I'm Mexican, so I play with Mexican people, not all of them are very they don't have too much of a proficiency when it comes to English, so it's not that easy. It wouldn't be easy to play that role-playing game, so I would definitely like to play that eventually. And those that I know, that is family and friends that actually know English, they are not interested in playing the Dying Earth role-playing game. Maybe I should try to play that with Abraham's method one of these days. And then Marco's question is, what would be the perfect RPG for you? Another very difficult question. It will have to be a perfect balance, simulation with storytelling, with rules that are complex but not complicated, and tie directly to the setting, the theme, the storyline, and the character and world development. That's all that I can think of, because perfection is very difficult to visualize, in my opinion, or imagine. And next question is, what was your biggest disappointment with a role-playing game and why? Oof, I've got several disappointments. Mostly when it comes to pushing political agendas. There are some really awesome role-playing games, and because they pushed, they wanted to push so much their political agendas, they distorted the setting. For example, Pathfinder. It started out great. The setting of Golarion was amazing, and as time went by, they started to change the sexuality of the deities, the situations that were going on. They even felt too forced. It's okay if you want to add homosexuals and lesbians in your role-playing games, because that actually happens in real life, so it reinforces the reality. But when they try to push it so hard in everywhere, that's when the system is affected, and the theme and the campaign setting. And you could say the same thing for Dungeons and Dragons. They also, suddenly Corellon Larethian is transsexual, if I'm not mistaken, or bisexual, or something like that. And when he was created, he was not like that at all. So they basically take classic elements and distort them in favor of politics. Another case, of course, Numenera. It came so bad to the point that in the latest version of Numenera, they did everything that was possible not to put white men on the cover. I mean, if you want to put different people of any color, black, yellow, red, whatever you like, whatever you want to call them. It's an alien setting as well, so that's great. But when you are forcing it again, that was unnecessary, and I have some thoughts as to why that happened. I'm going to put a couple of reviews in the description of this video when it comes to some Numenera supplements, where I talk about why I think they went to that in that direction. It mostly has to do with money. So that was a disappointment, and they actually make a point when you start to read the introduction of the newest version of Numenera. The politics are pushed so hard into the readers. And then my other disappointment in a similar way, the 20th anniversary version of Mage, of Onyx Path. That way they basically insult you if you are a white man. They have an entire section there telling you, oh, you evil white man, now you will understand how much damage you have caused to the world. And so I don't know what their problem is. Or maybe I do know, I simply don't want to accept it. It's all about the money and being accepted by certain groups. So it's a very disappointing thing that they have to push all of those politics. We already have so many good things, even of characters of any color, any race, and why do they have to push it that far? Some of my role-playing games have all sorts of people in the cover, so why do they still have to push it, to force it, if it was not intentionally created to be that way? And when it comes to the mechanics and the themes and the campaign setting, it's just too obvious that they are more in favor of certain politics rather than just creating a good role-playing game. Then Marco asks, do you have a holy grail game or book that you really want to acquire but have never found or couldn't afford to buy? Which is it? A holy grail. Maybe just for the emotional value, although I wouldn't spend too much on it because right now it's a bit expensive, but the hardcover version of Ravenloft for Dungeons & Dragons 3.0. Right now I really wouldn't want to purchase it because I think at the price it is being sold, it is not worth it. But when it first came out, I didn't have the money many years back, and I always thought, oh, Ravenloft, it's my favorite, probably my favorite Advanced Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting. Thinking about it right now, it probably is my favorite, and this connects with another question that I will answer in a few minutes. So just looking at that book, it also reminds me of vampiros.com.mx. It was a Mexican website that really helped people get together to play all sorts of role-playing games, and I remember seeing that book there, and I asked a question about that book because I want to know details about the cover and the content, and another very friendly person, he gave me the answers that I was looking for and how it moved further, how it moved the timeline in the setting of Ravenloft, and so it's sort of like a nostalgia charged item. But now that you can get many different Ravenloft PDFs for at a cheap price and even improved, because they are more affordable, but they also have updates because they did several changes when Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 came out. So right now I wouldn't want to buy it, I wouldn't go out of my way to purchase it, but if I see it like really at a very affordable price, and at the moment I don't have other things to attend to, then I would definitely get it. Now when it comes to the other question of Marco, what would the perfect platform for playing role-playing games online feature, in your opinion? Well, like I said, I do not enjoy playing role-playing games online nowadays, but I think the perfect platform, just taking things to the next level, would be one with holographic technology. It would be amazing if you had your table and you could sit there and perhaps using one of those headsets for virtual reality, or some sort of more advanced holograph technology, maybe you could project all of the other players around the table with their sheets and their dice, but in a more powerful way, more advanced way, not like, for example, with the tabletop simulator. It's kind of like that, but I want more something like in Star Wars, like the holograms in Star Wars. That would be pretty cool. I still would prefer to play physically, but if I was forced in some way to play role-playing games online, I would love to have that feature. Thanks for your questions, Marco. Now, questions from Null Inquisitor. Congratulations, welcome to the 1K club. Thanks, Null Inquisitor. His questions are: with an unlimited budget, what would be your RPG dream project? I would love to have a huge gaming room focused on role-playing games and war games as well, or any sort of game, but mostly focused on role-playing games. I can imagine this huge table at the center, decorated with all sorts of terrain pieces, castles, villages, forests, swamps, snowy mountains, basically like a huge continent in the middle of the room. And all of the walls would be lined with shelves with role-playing game books and miniatures. Pretty much a huge game room equipped for any sort of situation, perhaps with some monitors and computers as well to assist in different things, and a projector and some speakers for music and ambience. That would be pretty cool, having like constant ambience sounds. Perhaps if you are moving through a swamp, you hear insects and frogs and toads, but if you are moving through a forest, maybe you hear birds and the howling of wolves at times. So that would be pretty amazing, like my dream gaming room. Next question: what are the first 5 RPG books you would save from a house fire? That's a very difficult question as well. I would like to save them all. But if I had to choose, those would be the 3 Hackmaster books. Again, I apologize about the mirror effect. I'm going to see how I can fix that. But that would be the Hackmaster's Handbook and the Game Master's Guide. Hackmaster Game Master's Guide. It would also be the Bestiary, of course, and the Hacklopedia of Beasts. And I would also like to rescue the 2 books for the Forbidden Lands role-playing game, the Player's Handbook and the Forbidden Lands Game Master's Guide. Yeah, so those would definitely be the books that I would probably rescue, because they are close at hand and they look really nice, and I have many others on PDFs. So but I definitely want to avoid that situation. I have heard some horrible stories of players that got their houses burned down and they lost their entire RPG collection. That's such a nightmare. Well, and next question is: what is the proper waiting time before one of your famous high? I think it's when the video starts to roll, because sometimes I click record and I have to wait a few seconds, and then I notice that it's actually recording, and that's when I start with, "Hi, this is my review." I actually came out with that hi because many of you know, because I'm Mexican, English is not my native language, so I wasn't sure on how to start making role-playing game videos. So I thought, well, just say hello or hi and then start talking about what you want to talk about. So I settled with hi. And then his next question is: what is the longest campaign you ever ran? That would be a Ravenloft campaign in my teenage years. It lasted for about a year and a half. It's probably the greatest campaign that I ever ran. It was so amazing because it was after I understood Vampire the Masquerade. So I played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons in Faerun, and I went to play on Vampire the Masquerade, and then I took what I learned from Vampire the Masquerade and applied it to Ravenloft, because many of you know that Ravenloft is really focused on character development and many things related to moral dilemmas and spiritual perils and such, with the powers check and with the domain lords, the domains themselves. So in that dark setting, it was such a radical change. We that is, my players and I, we were so used to playing Dungeons and Dragons in a certain way, and I started the campaign with a typical Faerun fantasy adventure, and suddenly they got pulled into Ravenloft, and everybody was so terrified. They didn't know what I was doing, so they all kind of like huddled together. My players were kind of like making plans, like, you know, like in a football game or something, and they're like, oh no, what are we going to do? We're in deep trouble. Where is this place? We don't know anyone in this area. We don't know anything about this. So they panicked a bit, and all of their actions throughout those months, that year and a half, they did everything with great caution. They were always thinking, do we need to hunt? Are the people here friendly? Are they hostile? Do they want to kill us right away? Is there actually a way for us to obtain money here? Well, we don't know where the gold is at, the different adventure sites, where we can get quests. So it was a very tense and yes, very emotionally charged campaign. All of the different actions that my players took, it felt like they were actually there. They were actually living in Ravenloft. They started to talk with different non-player characters, to do research about different places, areas, structures. They never undertook any journey until they had all of the information, all of the supplies. They were exceptionally cautious about that approach, and they suffered so many character deaths, and they still created new characters, and they kept on tackling the different challenges. So it was quite amazing. And they didn't, just to give you an idea on how much they interacted with the game world, I think they reached level 8 of experience. So they didn't even reach like the highest levels. You could think, oh well, in a year and a half they probably got to level 20. We didn't get to play as often, but when we got to play like once a week, we did spend an entire weekdays playing Ravenloft. And they got so into the game world. So it's one of my more memorable campaigns, and I understand why it lasted so long, because everybody was enjoying it so much. But it eventually came to an end for several reasons. Next question: what is your gaming group look like these days? Any regulars that deserve a shout out? Well, at the moment my group has been cut in half. I only have 2 players, Antonio and Jose. My other players had to retire because they had things related to work and their families, so they were not into the experience. You notice how they were constantly like, their mind was somewhere else. Speaking about minds traveling, their minds were simply focused on their work, on their family. They were not there, they were not present, so they had to drop out of the session. They started to forget about what happened during last session, even with a recap or telling them a small summary. They were completely out of the experience. So now I only have 2 players, and well, the shout out, I don't think they will hear it, because they don't know I have a RPG review channel, because I don't want them to know about my game master and dungeon master techniques, or the things that how I run things. I want to keep them unaware to better surprise them. So I haven't told them about this channel, and I don't want them to risk watching a review of a module that I will perhaps use in a future adventure or campaign. And so yeah, but that's my group. And it's actually interesting when it comes to the personalities of my players. Antonio, I consider him to be he's kind of like one of my opposites. There's another person that I've met in my life that could be considered like Bizarro Abraham, or maybe he thinks that I'm Bizarro him. So we are kind of like very opposite, both in appearance and in personality, but we somehow get along. So that's very, very strange. It's very weird. You know that you have something special going when you are so different from the other person and you still get along. So I'm usually like, how would you say, very proper and a somewhat orderly guy when it comes to interacting with others. But Antonio has taught me how to break the rules in several ways. That's something that I learned from him, and I think that I have shared some knowledge or lessons, gave him some knowledge or lessons as well. So I think that's what keeps us as friends, that we learn from each other. And my other player, Jose, I usually get along well with good doctors, with true doctors, not those that start to spread out disinformation that telling you that face masks will magically keep you safe from viruses when they only keep you safe from certain bacteria, and that they don't say that you're going to produce bleach if you mix sodium chloride with vitamin C. If you search MMS on Wikipedia, it's going to tell you that it's bleach, and it's not. But because that combination, that composite, it can heal you of many things, they don't want people to know that. So when it comes to a real doctor who is focused on healing people, not keeping people sick and gaining money from them, I get along quite well with them, and Jose is one of those cases. So it's very interesting to play with Jose. When we are playing, he's constantly sharing some of his medical expertise, and I have actually also given him remedies and healing methods that he's currently using with his patients. So it's also a way of learning from each other. I think that's very important in a friendship, don't you think? I just became aware of it. I think friendships are established or are strengthened when you learn from each other. Because, for example, in the case of Antonio, he has traveled a lot. He's not traveling a lot lately, but when he was much younger, he went all around the world. He's probably been everywhere except Asia, I think. And he's constantly, well, not every country, of course, but he has a sample of different cultures, and he's constantly sharing things from this country or that culture. So it brings a lot to the table, in my opinion. Now, the other question: which role-playing game would you consider to have been the most challenging to learn and run? Definitely Hackmaster. When it comes to Vampire the Masquerade, like I told you, it was difficult to understand it, but when it comes to a role-playing game that was difficult to learn and run, definitely Hackmaster, and that's why it's my favorite fantasy role-playing game, because now that I properly know how to run it and I learned how to play it, it's such an amazing simulationist experience. I had a rough time trying to run my first session. I came up with a good system to keep track of second, because it's a second by second sort of combat. You need some way of properly organizing things. I'm going to put a link in the description where it gives some tips on how to do that. But definitely Hackmaster. All of those details on that you slept with the blood of your enemies, or that the enemy passed out from the pain that you inflicted through a wound, or that you got a critical hit and you ended up cutting a limb of the enemy, or puncturing some organ, and the exploding dice mechanic, and the way armor actually makes you easier to hit, but it gives you more damage reduction, and you have some ways of becoming a character more specialized in dodging. In fact, if you are facing opponents that are just huge, we're talking ogres and drakes and all of that, it could be worth it to be more focused on dodging lightly armored, because even if you have your shield and your armor, you're going to take some damage from those giant attacks, to call them in a way, oversized attacks. But when it comes to characters from more or less your same stature, it's much better to have an armored character. So it's very realistic. It's a work of art. It's a triumph in RPG science, in my opinion. Definitely Hackmaster. And those are all the questions. Thank you so much for asking so many questions, allowing me to give so many different answers. If it wasn't for your questions, I wouldn't have this video. And I answered them honestly. I know that perhaps some people do not like or do not agree with the answers that I gave, but I'm telling you honestly, that's what I honestly think. If you want me to pretend like I give you a phony answer, that's not me. Well, thanks again for your questions. I really need to fix this thing with the video. I don't like that mirror effect. And if you have any further comments or questions about what I talked about today, please let me know in the comment section. And thank you so much to those that have been sending drive-through RPG gift certificates to support the channel, especially those of you that surprised me with some good RPG gift certificates because of my 1010 subscribers. Thank you so much. You guys are amazing. Thank you. And if anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you. I will bring out an October related video next week with my plans for that month. I hope you will watch it then. And hope you have a great day and see you later.